Hi everyone, it's great to be able to present my crisis plan to you as we wrap up the semester. Here's what I'm going to discuss. I'll start with why I chose my client and tell you more about the organization. And then I'll dive into the 5-phase plan that I developed based upon the CDC model we studied. So why did I choose my client? I'm on an advisory board for Women's Wilderness. And one day this summer I got a call from the executive director. They had just experienced a near life-threatening disaster on a girls' wilderness course. She had called to ask for support to handle communications for the situation. They did not have a crisis communications plan. So a few weeks later, when we started the semester, I thought about studying a variety of clients, but I finally decided on Women's Wilderness. I didn't choose the most complex client for this semester, but I did feel strongly that I was choosing a client that really needed support. Women's Wilderness is a small nonprofit based in Boulder. Think of it as outward bound for just for girls. Women's Wilderness runs adventure camps designed to help young girls strengthen their leadership skills through gaining courage and confidence in the outdoors. What's great is that for many girls, it's their first experience in the wilderness. Girls are in mountain environments, hiking, rock climbing, and backpacking during the summer. And of course, they're exposed to the risks that these activities and weather-related events may bring. Overall, the goal of this plan is to better prepare its professional and field staff for a crisis event so they don't get a call like I did last summer when they're unprepared. The campaign has 3 objectives. 1. Increase girls and family risk preparedness before embarking on a camp expedition by implementing care communication to bolster their awareness of and education about how to maintain safety in the wilderness environment. Remember, this is many girls' first experience in the wilderness, so this is really important. 2. Increase the organization's ability to skillfully manage the initial, maintenance, resolution, and evaluation phases of a crisis. And 3, maintain or enhance the organization's reputation as a trusted girls' adventure camp, in addition to maintaining or increasing course participation and donation levels in the year following a crisis. The plan is designed to achieve 5 key outcomes, or measures of success. I'll let you review those now on this slide. Now, let's discuss the plan. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention outline 5 critical phases of a crisis. Here's a quick look at the various phases, which are the framework for this plan. I've identified actions for each plan, or for each phase. Here are the highlights. 1. Pre-crisis. As the CDC notes, while a plan cannot guarantee successful management, it can create a template and process for initial actions and decisions. This is the goal for this phase, which includes the steps listed on this slide. Now, most of this is pretty straightforward, but here are some highlights of these actions. First, legal. During planning, seeking legal counsel is vital to help the organization achieve a key outcome of avoiding litigation by family members of anyone affected in a future crisis. We will need to look for pro bono legal support. Second, stakeholders. Let's start with an important quote from a crisis expert about public safety. Public safety is the top priority in a crisis, and considering these guidelines from Coombs, the top 3 stakeholders for us are 1. Participating girls, 2. On-course instructors, and 3. The parents or the immediate family of both the girls and the instructors. In addition, primary stakeholders include everyone from donors to media. In addition to Boulder media, we also need to include media in locations where the camps are activated. Now, even though camps are in remote locations, we'll identify the outlets that cover those specific wilderness areas. Secondary stakeholders include elected officials in Boulder and the Accrediting Association. Next, it's important to develop and maintain relationships with these key stakeholder groups, and this starts with the parents. Conversation with parents must be handled with care and a high degree of customer service during the registration period. By making parents feel confident about the organization during registration, it can build on that positive relationship in the unfortunate event of an on-course crisis. Fourth, we need to create a host of messages and materials and test them. Funds are limited for formal testing, but we'll coordinate focus groups with girls from local middle schools and parents from PTO groups to pre-test messages and graphics. We'll use the message testing insights to complete all of the materials. Now, for the template messages and media materials, the tone of these materials is critical. Meer and Verhoeven reveal that emotional signals embedded in crisis responses may affect corporate reputations by reducing feelings of anger and increasing the acceptance of the organizational message. In contrast, emotionless responses may be perceived as lacking in sincerity and cold. Because the crisis may involve a child, this message development and refinement really deserves utmost consideration. Finally, the role of spokesperson, which will be the executive director. It's critical to how a crisis is perceived. Research shows that a soundbite or a photograph can be the enduring symbol of defining a crisis moment. Now, while this crisis could be short-lived, it's important to avoid the crisis being defined like BP's Deepwater Horizon spill crisis was, with the "I'd like my life back" gaffe from its CEO. The ED will be media trained, so she's prepared for this role. Now, this wraps up the pre-crisis phase of planning. It's important, it's detailed, and it's where a lot of smart time has to be dedicated. Now let's move on to the second phase, prep for the initial phase of a crisis. This phase is the most chaotic, and people need to be prepared to manage through that chaos. Field staff will provide information to the executive director about what happened. Everyone involved must be acutely aware of capturing factual information, and this will be challenging because field staff may be managing girls with severe injuries or even loss of life. Field staff will follow a crisis checklist and make their final incident report via satellite phone immediately after calling emergency responders and getting the scene under control. At that point, the executive director assumes the lead for the crisis response effort. After collecting initial information, the executive director must place phone calls to the girls' parents using a template call script that we'll do in the template materials. This must happen as quickly as possible and ideally within an hour. If it is possible and the situation is under control, the executive director may request that field staff take a photograph that captures an emotional moment at the scene. Why? Let's take a look at this quote from crisis researchers highlighting why visuals conveying emotions are powerful. Capturing an appropriate image of the girls and instructors is a compassionate moment that the organization could use to demonstrate empathy at a relevant time during or after the crisis. Now it's time to communicate more about why and how this happened. We're in the maintenance phase. If field staff error was involved, Women's Wilderness needs to take steps to ensure that this error will not happen again, whether that be with operations or additional training. Additional media engagement may be necessary too, and we'll need to manage and address those needs as they come up. Next, we've reached the resolution phase. Women's Wilderness will contact the Association for Experiential Educators, its accrediting organization, to examine what happened. The purpose of this step is to reassure stakeholders that the organization is seeking trusted third-party input to review its operational procedures. Based on a positive analysis, Women's Wilderness can reassure stakeholders that it followed procedures as expertly as possible. Alternately, we may need to communicate about steps that we'll take to adjust procedures in the future. And finally, the evaluation phase, which brings us to the end of this presentation. Following a crisis, the executive director will lead discussions with the staff and board to evaluate the effectiveness of the response and communications. The lessons learned will help to evolve the crisis plan to better manage future incidents. The evaluation checklist is comprised of the outcomes outlined in the measures of successes that you saw on an earlier slide. The executive director will monitor the organization's post-crisis efforts against those 5 outcomes in the weeks and months after the crisis. By doing so, the organization will have full and thorough understanding if it maintained or even improved its reputation following any future camp tragedies. As I mentioned in the beginning, I didn't choose the most complex client for this semester, but I felt that I was choosing a client that really needed support. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.